Snow covered everything, except his shame. When the first knock came, Sakuma Jinzō didn't move. When the 10th did, he reached for the door he swore never to open. Outside stood 10 women, faces bruised by cold and fear, claiming they'd been banished for burning the Lord's granary. Behind them, torches flickered in the ravine, too many to belong to travelers. 15 years of silence pressed against that wooden door. If he opened it, the mountain would no longer protect him. If he didn't, no one would protect them. Snow pressed against the cabin like a hand trying to smother it. Wind moved through the cracks, carrying the smell of pine and ash. Sakuma Jinzō sat on the floor beside a small brazier, hibachi, a shallow iron bowl used for heat, watching the coals pulse red and die down. The faint hiss of burning charcoal was the only sound left in his world. Then came a knock. He didn't move. The mountain was empty this time of year. No hunters, no pilgrims. The river below had frozen weeks ago. Another knock followed, lighter, hesitant. A third came before the echo of the second had died. 10 in total, steady, deliberate, like someone counting their courage with each strike of the fist. Jinzō's breath slowed. He looked at the door he hadn't opened in 15 winters. Behind it lay the world he'd left. Voices, duty, failure. His right hand drifted to the folded cloth on the floor where his katana slept. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. The weight of it was already in his chest. He rose. The floor creaked. His joints ached the way old wood bends before it breaks. The knocks stopped, replaced by a sound softer than the wind. Muffled sobs, 10 breaths shivering together. He slid the latch. Cold air burst through, cutting the heat from the brazier. 10 women stood in the storm, their faces raw from snow and travel. The eldest, Lady Tomo, held herself upright through will alone. The youngest clung to her sleeve. Behind them, down in the ravine, torchlight flickered, dozens of them crawling up the path like fire ants. "We only ask for warmth," Tomo said. Her voice was calm, but her hands shook. Jinzō stared past her at the lights. Soldiers moving in formation. He could tell by the rhythm of the torches. "The Lord's men, leave," he said. His voice was rough from disuse. "You'll bring them here." The women didn't move. Oritsu stepped forward, younger than Tomo, older than the rest. She met his gaze without flinching. "They'll reach us either way. We have nowhere left to run." Jinzō saw in her eyes something he hadn't seen in years, defiance lit by fear. He had seen it once before, in another woman's eyes, long dead. The memory tightened his chest. He turned back inside. For a moment, the women thought he would shut the door. Instead, he stepped aside. "The floor's cold," he muttered. "Keep close to the fire." They entered silently, like ghosts unsure they'd been allowed to live. Steam rose from their wet robes as the brazier's heat touched them. The smell of damp fabric filled the small room. Chio, the youngest, coughed until the healer pulled her close and rubbed her back. Jinzō sat opposite them, his shadow stretching along the wall. "Why do they hunt you?" Tomo hesitated. "They say we burned the daimyo's rice storehouse." "You didn't." "We barely had enough oil to cook," Oritsu said. "But someone had to take the blame." Jinzō's jaw tightened. He'd heard the same story 100 times during the wars. Lords burning their own supplies, blaming peasants to keep fear alive. He looked at the brazier. The coals had dimmed, one ember still glowing. Outside the horn sounded, low, distant, drawing closer. The youngest woman flinched. Tomoe rose, but Jinzō raised a hand. "Stay." He crossed to the shutter and peered through the crack. Torches climbed the slope in a thin red line. He shut the windows slowly. His palms were dry, but the old scars across them began to itch, the same feeling that came before a fight. He flexed his hands until it passed. The women watched him in silence. The fear filled the space like smoke, thick enough to taste. Jinzō took a long breath. "You'll rest here tonight," he said. "At dawn you go." Tomo bowed. Oritsu didn't. She studied him the way soldiers study the distance between blades. Jinzō turned back to the brazier. The ember pulsed once, twice, and caught a new breath of air. Flame returned. He stared at it, knowing exactly what it meant. The fire was awake again. By morning, the storm had buried the trail that led to his cabin. The world outside was white and silent, the kind of silence that pressed on the lungs. Jinzō stepped outside with a bucket to fetch snow for water. The air bit at his face. The women watched from inside through the open panel, unsure whether he would return. He moved slowly, deliberate, the way soldiers do when every motion is weighed. The mountain knew him well. It had shaped his habits. 15 years of repetition. Chop wood, boil rice, mend what breaks. The quiet life of a man who had once sworn an oath and lived long enough to regret keeping it. He set the bucket beside the brazier and waited for the ice to melt. The women sat close together, steam rising from their robes. He didn't ask names. They offered none. In war, names made grief heavier. Lady Tomo was the first to speak. "You live alone here?" He nodded. "No family." "Once," he said. He didn't explain. She didn't press. Silence settled again, not comfortable but necessary. The sound of snow sliding from the roof broke it for a moment, a heavy thud that made Chio flinch. Oritsu didn't move. Her eyes stayed on Jinzō. "What happens when they find this place?" She asked. "They won't," he said. "The storm erased your trail. And if they do?" Jinzō poured tea from a small clay pot. His hands were steady. "Then we see how much the mountain favors you." Oritsu frowned. "You sound like you've seen it before." "I have." Tomoe leaned forward. "You fought for the Ichigo clan." He didn't answer. "The scars on his hands did it for him." Tomoe's voice softened. "Why leave the sword behind?" Jinzō stared at the brazier. The coals hissed, collapsing into themselves. "Because the last time I raised it, I buried a village." No one spoke after that. The only sound was wind. When the tea was gone, he set the cup down with precision. Every gesture was controlled. The posture of a man who measured himself against his own ghosts. He stood, went to the door, and looked out again. The sky had cleared. Down the slope, half hidden by trees, faint marks cut through the snow. Not footprints. Wheel ruts. A cart had passed recently, too heavy to belong to travelers. He closed the door and turned back to the women. "You didn't tell me everything." Tomo hesitated, then lowered her gaze. "There is more." Oritsu stood, pulling something from her sleeve, a small pouch sealed with wax, the crest of the daimyo impressed on it. "We found this near the granary before the fire." "It's proof the rice was taken before the flames." Jinzō's eyes narrowed. "You kept this?" "It was all we had," she said, "and all they needed to kill us for." He took the pouch and held it over the brazier, feeling the heat on his fingers. Inside was truth, and truth was as dangerous as a blade. He handed it back. "Hide it well. Men kill faster for paper than for food." A horn sounded again, closer this time, not the long, mournful call of the night before, but short bursts. Searching. Tomoe looked to the door. "What will you do?" "Nothing," he said. "You'll leave at dusk. They'll find empty ground." Oritsu stepped closer. "And you? You think silence will save you again?" Her words cut deep. He didn't reply. He walked to the corner where the katana lay wrapped in cloth. His hand hovered above it, then pulled back. "The last time I broke silence, people died. The next time I keep it, maybe they'll live." The horn echoed again, sharper now, not searching anymore, but signaling. They had found a trail. He looked toward the door and saw it tremble in the wind. 15 years of quiet weighed against 10 lives sitting behind him. The mountain, once his refuge, no longer felt like protection. It felt like judgment. Outside, the wind shifted. Dogs began to bark in the valley. The silence had ended. The barking came first, faint, uncertain, carried by the wind. Then the rhythm of boots crunching through snow. Jinzō knew the pattern. Patrol. 4 men at least, maybe 6. Not a full unit. Just enough to track fugitives, not enough to fight a war. He motioned the women away from the windows. The cabin was small, barely enough space for 10 people to breathe. The scent of damp cloth, sweat, and smoke filled the air. Lady Tomo held the younger ones back. Oritsu stayed close to the shutter, her hand resting on the hilt of a short knife, the only weapon among them. "Stay quiet," Jinzō said. His voice was low, level. Command had not left him even after years of silence. Outside, the dogs drew nearer. He could hear the handler's shouts, sharp and impatient. Then the crunch of snow slowed. The group had stopped below the slope, maybe 20 paces from the cabin. A man's voice carried upward, "This way." The wind changed. "They're close." Jinzō reached for the rope he'd tied across the doorframe the night before, his first defense. Pulling it once tightened a line outside, where wooden stakes waited, half buried under the drift. Crude, but enough to break legs if someone charged uphill too quickly. Inside, the women exchanged frightened glances. Chia whimpered, before the healer covered her mouth gently. The sound still slipped through, a thin, trembling note that cut the silence like a blade. Outside, the dogs barked again, sharper now. Jinzō cursed under his breath. He moved to the window, peering through the slit in the panel. 2 men in straw cloaks appeared first, snow clinging to their armor. Behind them, a third held the leash of the dogs. Farther back, torchlight flickered. More men waiting. "Too many for him alone," Tomo whispered. "We should run." "Run where?" Oritsu hissed. "The mountain eats those who flee in daylight." Jinzō ignored them. He opened a small chest near the brazier, pulling out a pouch of ash and scattering it near the door. The ash would mask scent for a few moments, an old soldier's trick. Then he took a breath, slow and deep, and stepped outside. The air stabbed his lungs. Snow reached his knees. The men below turned, surprised. One of them raised a hand. "Who's there?" "Only a hermit," Jinzō said. The leader stepped forward, torchlight catching the edge of his jaw. "We tracked 10 criminals, women accused of arson against the Lord's storehouse. Seen anyone pass this way?" Jinzō met his eyes. "No one comes here." The man studied him, suspicion narrowing his gaze. "You live alone?" 15 years. Strange place to grow old. Better than dying in service to fools," the insult landed. The younger soldiers shifted uneasily, unsure whether to laugh or strike. The leader smirked instead. "Hermit or not, the Lord's law still reaches this far." He gestured toward the cabin. "We'll search." Jinzō's pulse slowed, the stillness that used to come before combat. "You won't," he said. The soldier stepped closer, boots sinking into the drift. "And if we do?" Jinzō tilted his head toward the slope. "Then mind your footing." The man looked down just as the stake trap gave way. The front soldier slipped first, crashing into the snow. The others stumbled after him, their torches scattering orange arcs across the white. One flame landed near the dogs. They yelped and pulled free, bolting downhill. For a heartbeat, chaos replaced order. Jinzō turned, walking back toward the door before they could regroup. Behind him, curses filled the wind. Inside, the women stared at him in disbelief. "You attacked them," Tomoe whispered. "No," he said, shaking off the snow. "I let gravity do the work." Oritsu stepped closer. "They'll be back." "With more." "I know." She hesitated, then asked quietly, "You could have killed them. Why didn't you?" He met her eyes. "Because killing them won't save you. It'll only invite their brothers." For a moment she held his gaze, trying to understand the man who spoke like a warrior, yet refused to fight. He poured water over the brazier to dim the glow. Less light, less target. "We'll move before nightfall," he said. "If the snow holds, we can reach the cedar ridge by dawn." Tomo frowned. "The younger ones can't walk that far. Then they die here." His words cut through the room like frost. No one spoke. Even Oritsu looked away. Jinzō rubbed his temples. "You chose this mountain," he said. "It doesn't forgive weakness." Tomo straightened, voice hard. "And yet you opened your door." He didn't answer. The truth was heavier than the silence. Outside, the wind carried the echo of orders, distant now but organized again. The soldiers hadn't given up. They were regrouping. Jinzō sat near the brazier, hands steady over the faint heat. "You'll rest for 1 hour. Then we leave." Oritsu looked at him, the lines of anger softening into something else. Recognition, maybe respect. "If you were done with the world," she said, "you wouldn't be planning to save it." He glanced at her, expression unreadable. "Don't mistake survival for mercy." She didn't respond. Instead, she sat by the door, knife resting on her thigh, watching the dark. The hour passed slowly. The women whispered prayers. The healer tightened Oritsu's bandage, though she wasn't yet wounded, only preparing. When Jinzō finally stood, the mountain had gone quiet again. He pushed the door open and tested the wind. The soldiers' voices had faded downslope. For now, the storm hid them once more. He turned to the women. "We move." No one argued this time. They stepped into the snow, the cabin shrinking behind them, the brazier's last ember flickering once before dying. Jinzō didn't look back, but he felt the door close in his mind, the same way it had once before. Some promises return whether you keep them or not. Snow swallowed their footsteps almost as soon as they formed. The storm had weakened, but the air still cut through layers of cloth. Jinzō led the group single file along a narrow ridge lined with black pines. The women followed in silence, each breath clouding into the dark. No one spoke of the cabin. It had vanished behind them, as if the mountain had already claimed it back. Jinzō moved with the precision of habit, eyes scanning the slope, ears tuned to every shift in wind. The rope trap had bought them a few hours, nothing more. Soldiers would search higher once the sun rose. He stopped at a bend where the ridge widened. "We rest here," he said. Lady Tomo collapsed to her knees, leaning against a tree. The healer helped Chiyo unwrap her soaked straw sandals. Her feet were white, almost translucent. Jinzō watched but said nothing. Compassion was a luxury that slowed movement, and every delay was another trail in the snow. Oritsu stood apart, her knife drawn, eyes fixed downslope. "They'll follow," she said. "They will," Jinzō replied. "But they don't know the mountain. You do?" "I used to." He scanned the dark line of trees ahead. "It remembers me well enough." The women exchanged uncertain glances. His words held neither confidence nor comfort, only the tone of a man, resigned to whatever waited. He crouched near a fallen pine and brushed away snow to expose bark. "This way," he said, motioning toward a narrow gully, half hidden by roots. The descent was steep and slick with ice, but below lay a dry ravine sheltered from wind. A place to hide until dusk. One by one, they followed. Snow slid beneath their feet, branches scraping their arms. Chiyo slipped once, catching herself on Oritsu's sleeve. When they reached the bottom, the sound of the storm softened. The ravine felt close, heavy with old air. A frozen stream cut through its center, glinting under the gray sky. Jinzō gathered broken branches and struck flint. The women circled the faint spark like moths. He fed the flame just enough to breathe, no more. "No smoke," he warned. Tomo glanced up. "You've done this before, leading people who run from death." He didn't look at her. Not everyone escaped. For a long moment, only the crack of melting frost filled the air. Then Oritsu spoke, voice low but firm. "You fought for the Echigo daimyo. They said you burned a village to end a rebellion." He met her eyes, his expression unreadable. "They said many things. Which part was true?" He didn't answer. The silence was reply enough. Tomo broke it gently. "Whatever happened, you opened your door. That's more than most men would have done." "Opening it doesn't absolve me," he said. "It just means the world found me again." Oritsu studied him a moment longer. "Maybe the world came to give you another chance." He turned away, cutting the conversation short. The past had a voice again, and it spoke through her. By midday the light dimmed. The storm thickened once more, hiding the sun. The women huddled near the faint warmth, conserving breath. Jinzō remained standing, eyes fixed on the slope above. When the first shout came, it wasn't surprise that moved him, only inevitability. "They found the tracks," he said. Tomoe rose. "Can we move?" He shook his head. "Not yet. The ridge above leads to open ground. They'll see us." Oritsu's grip tightened on her knife. "Then we fight here." Jinzō looked at her, the stubborn set of her jaw, the same spark that her sister once had. "You think courage can stop arrows?" "No," she said, "but it keeps us standing while they aim." Her defiance almost made him smile. Almost. He crouched beside the frozen stream and began shaping the ice with his knife. The women watched as he carved shallow hollows, filling them with slush and broken branches. "When they step here," he said, "they'll sink. It'll slow them long enough for us to climb the other side." Tomoe frowned. "You mean for us to run?" "I mean for you to live." The echo of command returned to his tone, hard and familiar. He pointed toward the far wall of the ravine. "You'll climb when I tell you. Don't look back." The women obeyed. Even Oritsu stayed silent. Minutes stretched into an hour. The wind shifted again, carrying voices close now. Torches flared on the ridge, orange against the white. Jinzō crouched low, snow falling into his collar. He could hear the boots crunching above, the snap of branches. The first soldier slid down the slope, landing hard near the traps. Another followed. When the ice gave way, the sound cracked like bone. The men shouted, sinking knee-deep in freezing water. Jinzō moved fast, throwing snow to smother their torches. Darkness swallowed them. Now! He barked. The women climbed. Oritsu was last, gripping the frozen edge until her fingers bled. Jinzō pushed her up, then turned back once more, checking, listening. The soldiers' curses echoed behind him. One raised a bow. Jinzō saw the movement, ducked, and the arrow splintered the ice where his shoulder had been. He climbed after the women, muscles burning, hands raw. When he reached the top, Oritsu offered her arm. He ignored it, pulling himself up by the roots. They ran through the trees until their lungs tore from the cold. The sound of pursuit faded, swallowed by wind and distance. When they stopped, no one spoke for a long time. The forest around them glowed faintly under the snow's reflection, endless and silent. Jinzō leaned against a tree, breath slow but steady. His palms bled where ice had bitten skin. He wrapped them in cloth, watching steam rise from his breath. Tomo finally said, "You could have killed them." "You didn't." He looked at her, his face unreadable. "If I kill, they'll send 50 more. Mercy buys time." Oritsu wiped blood from her knuckles. "Or it buys guilt." He turned toward her, eyes dark but calm. "I've already paid that price." The wind moved through the trees like an answer neither of them wanted to hear. Far below, faint horns called again. The pursuit had not ended, only learned patience, and patience was the weapon of men who had nothing but time. By dusk, the light had turned the forest to iron. The snow no longer fell, it waited. Jinzō led them along the riverbed until the trees opened into a clearing of black stones and frost. The air was still, too still. He raised a hand for silence, scanning the slope above. Nothing moved, yet something pressed against his instincts like a blade's tip grazing the skin. "Here," he said. "We'll stop." The women sank to the ground, exhaustion dragging them down. Chiyo's breathing came shallow. Her lips were cracked and blue. The healer knelt beside her, feeling her pulse, shaking her head. "She hasn't eaten since yesterday," she murmured. Oritsu took the rice bundle from her robe, what little remained, and handed it over. Jinzō watched, saying nothing. Hunger made people weak, but pity made them reckless. Tomo tried to light a small fire, but the wood was damp. Sparks died before reaching air. Jinzō crouched beside her, pulling the flint from her hand. "Too much smoke," he said. "They'll smell it." "She'll die without heat," Tomo whispered. "She'll die faster if they find us." The words came colder than he intended. Tomoe glared at him but said nothing. The only sound was Chiyo's faint breathing, each gasp thinner than the last. The healer covered her with a spare cloak and whispered prayers that froze before reaching heaven. Jinzō turned away. Mercy had its limits, and he'd already crossed too many. He walked toward the stream, crouching near the frozen surface. Beneath the ice, black water moved, slow and relentless. He broke a hole with his knife, the sound echoing like a muted scream. He rinsed his face in the freezing current. The pain was sharp, cleansing. His reflection in the water trembled, a face carved by years, by regret. He remembered another night like this long ago, a woman begging him to protect her child as fire closed in. He'd hesitated then too. The memory burned hotter than the cold. Behind him, voices rose. He turned. The healer was crying quietly, holding Chiyo's small hand. The girl's chest had stopped moving. The others gathered, silent. Even Oritsu looked away. Tomoe closed the girl's eyes with steady fingers. No one prayed this time. Jinzō approached. "We move now," he said. Tomo's head snapped up. "We bury her." The ground's frozen. "Then we burn her. They'll see the smoke." Her voice hardened. "She was one of us." He met her stare, two wills grinding against each other like stone. Finally he said, "Then we do it quickly." They built a small pyre beneath a fallen tree, hidden from the valley. The fire caught with little smoke, a clean burn. The light flickered across their faces, hollowing their eyes. The women stood shoulder to shoulder, no tears left. When the flames died and the ashes cooled, Jinzō counted the shadows, moving in the dark. 9 now. The mountain had taken one back. Oritsu stepped forward, placing the girl's ribbon into the flames. She wanted to see spring, she murmured. Jinzō looked at the fire until it seared his vision. The smell of burning cloth filled his lungs. When the flames began to fade, he covered them with snow. No trace left. Only a small black patch on the ground, another secret for the mountain to keep. They walked again under the first stars. The trail sloped upward, the climb brutal. Jinzō's legs felt heavy. The years weighed double in cold air. The women followed in silence, but their footsteps faltered. Each one carried a piece of Chiyo's ribbon tied to her sleeve, a promise or a curse. At the ridge, Jinzō stopped. The valley below shimmered faintly, torchlight. The soldiers had split into groups. He counted them by pattern, 3 patrols moving in arcs. The trap was closing. They've learned the terrain, he said quietly. Tomo came beside him. How many? Enough, Oritsu peered into the dark. Then we don't stop. He shook his head. You won't outrun men who don't feel shame. What do you suggest? Tomoe asked. He looked toward a cluster of caves in the cliff face, narrow openings once used by charcoal burners. There, he said. Hide until dawn. If they search the ridge, I'll draw them away. Oritsu stepped forward. You can't take them all. I don't have to. I just need them to follow the wrong man. Tomoe studied him. Why help us now? Because I already watched one village burn. He didn't raise his voice, but every word cut through the cold like steel. For a moment, no one moved. Then Tomoe nodded. We'll wait for you. He turned away before anyone could speak again. The women moved toward the caves, their silhouettes swallowed by the dark. Oritsu lingered at the edge. If you die, she said, you'll prove nothing. He didn't look back. If I live, maybe I'll prove too much. Then he vanished into the trees. The snow muffled everything except his heartbeat. He moved downhill, fast but silent, until he reached the lower path. There he stopped. The sound of boots came again, nearer this time mixed with the panting of dogs. He crouched behind a pine and waited. The first patrol appeared through the mist, 6 men, torches flickering like eyes. He could see their faces now, not monsters, just hungry, cold, afraid. Soldiers doing what they were told. The kind he used to lead. Jinzō reached for the cloth at his side. His hand brushed the hilt of the katana beneath it. The urge came fast, brutal. One stroke, quick, clean. But he stopped himself. Not yet. He drew his knife instead and sliced through a frozen branch above him. It fell across the path, scattering snow. The soldiers turned toward the noise. He moved left, another sound, another distraction. They followed. When the last torch disappeared into the fog, he let out a long breath. His body trembled not from cold, but restraint. He had protected them. For now, but as he climbed back toward the caves, a thought took hold. Every mercy left a witness, and witnesses always called for revenge. The first loss was behind him, but the mountain was only beginning to take its due. By dawn, the wind had changed direction. It carried the smell of smoke, faint but certain. Jinzō crouched at the ridge above the caves, studying the horizon. The patrol he had misled during the night was burning torches in the valley below, trying to melt the trail out of the snow. They hadn't given up. They never did. Behind him, the caves were quiet. Only the soft crackle of frost breaking from the roof betrayed movement. He entered the first hollow, ducking low. The women had gathered deep inside, wrapped in cloaks and each other's breath. The fire was just embers. Tomo nodded when she saw him. They passed. For now, Jinzō said. He sat by the wall, stretching his legs. His body was stiff. The cold had settled into his bones like regret. The healer checked the others. One woman's ankle had swollen badly, twisted on the climb. She wouldn't walk fast again. Another coughed blood quietly into her sleeve. The mountain was claiming its tax. Jinzō closed his eyes, just for a moment, listening. The wind outside sounded like breathing, steady, inhuman. He remembered nights in the field when death felt just as close, yet quieter. Why do they still hunt us? Oritsu's voice cut through the silence. She sat near the back, her face lit by the ember's faint glow. "If the fire was to hide their theft, why chase us across half the province?" "Because truth doesn't die when you burn a house," Jinzō said. "It hides until someone finds it again." Tomo looked at Oritsu. "You mean the letter?" The healer stiffened. "You told him." "He saw it," Oritsu said. Jinzō nodded once. "A daimyo's crest in the wrong hands can end a family." Oritsu reached into her robe and drew out the small wax-sealed pouch. The edges were damp, the seal cracked but still legible. "This was found inside the granary before it burned," she said. "My sister took it when she saw the soldiers loading carts." She couldn't read the script, but she had seen that crest before, painted on the wagons leaving the granary the night before it burned. "They killed her for it." Jinzo's eyes opened slowly. The room seemed to shrink around the words. "She was a servant," Oritsu continued. "They said she set the fire herself to hide her theft. But she only tried to stop them." She looked directly at him. "You were there!" The air tightened. Tomo's hand froze mid-motion. The healer stopped breathing. Jinzō didn't move. His face barely changed, but the silence that followed his stillness said enough. Oritsu rose. "You were one of the guards sent to protect that shipment. You saw what they did. You saw them kill her." Jinzo's jaw clenched. His voice came slow. "I saw her die, yes." Oritsu took a step forward. "And you did nothing." His eyes met hers, calm, hollow. "I obeyed orders. I didn't protect lies. I just didn't stop them." Her voice sharpened. "And now you expect redemption by hiding us?" "No," he said. "There's no redemption, only repetition. The mountain gave me yours so I could fail again. Or not." The others shifted uneasily. The healer gripped her satchel tighter. Even Tomo's face betrayed a flicker of doubt. Oritsu's breathing quickened. "She called for help," she said. "You were close enough to hear." "I was." The admission hit harder than denial. Oritsu's hand trembled around the letter. "Then why open your door for us?" Jinzō looked at the brazier's dying ember. "Because 15 years ago I didn't." The cave went still. The only sound was the slow drip of melted ice. Tomo's voice finally broke through the quiet. "If what she says is true, then this letter is proof not only of theft, but of murder sanctioned by power." "Proof doesn't matter," Jinzō said. "Power doesn't read. It listens when frightened," Oritsu said. Her anger was cold now, honed. "If this reaches the capital, the daimyo falls." He stared at her for a long time. She resembled the sister he remembered, the same eyes that refused to bow. But her rage was sharper, cleaner. "You think justice waits beyond these mountains?" he asked. She held his gaze. "I think silence already killed enough." Jinzō looked away first. He stood walking to the mouth of the cave. The world outside was grey and endless. The soldiers' torches had vanished, but he knew they hadn't left. They were waiting just like him. He spoke without turning. "When dawn clears, we move west. The Shogun's road crosses near the Cedar Valley. If you reach it, someone might listen." Tomoe frowned. "And you?" "I'll make sure they look the wrong way." "You mean to die?" Oritsu said. "I mean to finish something." She stepped closer, her anger cracking into something else. Not forgiveness, but understanding of what survival cost. "If you die now, no one will know what you saw. You'll disappear the same way she did." Jinzō turned then, eyes steady. "You mistake silence for death. It's worse than that. Silence remembers." Outside, the wind shifted again, no longer aimless, but carrying rhythm. Hooves. Tomo rose, every muscle alert. "They found us." Jinzō's hand went to the cloth at his side. "Then we move now." The women scrambled to gather what little they had. Oritsu stayed behind a heartbeat longer, watching him. "If I die today," she said, "at least I'll die breaking something that deserved to be broken." He nodded once, as if in acknowledgement or apology. Then he turned toward the light, stepping into the cold. The snow was falling again, erasing the trail before it even formed. Behind them, the cave emptied of warmth, leaving only the faint echo of words that had waited 15 years to be spoken. They moved before dawn, following the frozen river west. The storm had thinned, leaving a dull silver sky that flattened every shadow. The snow was harder now, the kind that groaned under weight. Each step sounded like confession. Jinzō walked ahead, his breath steady, eyes tracing the terrain. The women followed behind in silence, saving their strength. The healer carried the satchel close to her chest, the one holding the letter. Oritsu kept watch at the rear, knife in hand, scanning the trees for movement. After hours of walking, they reached a field of old charcoal pits, abandoned since the wars. Half-collapsed kilns dotted the slope, their openings black against the snow. Jinzō studied them carefully. "We rest here," he said. Tomoe hesitated. "Too exposed." "They won't expect us to stop on open ground," he said. "That's why we will." The women sank among the ruins, grateful for stillness. The healer tended to the woman with the injured ankle. Jinzō crouched near one of the kilns, listening to the wind shift through the valley. It was quiet, too quiet. He stood and climbed the nearest mound, eyes narrowing. In the distance, faint movement glimmered between the trees. Torches again. They were closer than expected, too close. The line of light wasn't searching, it was advancing. "They've split into 2 columns, he muttered. "They mean to trap us." Tomoe looked up, weary. "Then what do we do?" Jinzō's gaze fell on the kilns. "We dig in." They used what tools they had, broken branches, bare hands, to carve shallow hollows inside the largest kiln. The women crawled into the dark interior, crouching low, as Jinzō covered the entrance with snow and ash. Only thin cracks of light remained. Inside, it was stifling. The air tasted of soot. Breathing became a negotiation between fear and survival. Chiyo's absence was a ghost among them, her silence heavier than the mountain itself. Time passed. The sound of marching boots reached them, measured, unhurried. Voices followed, muffled through the kiln walls. "Search the ridge," one man barked. The tracks split. "They're close," another voice, calmer. "Burn the pits if you must. The Lord wants proof, not prisoners." Oritsu's grip tightened around her knife. Jinzō raised a hand, signaling stillness. Every breath turned into steam that had nowhere to go. Then came the sound of wood striking wood. Someone testing the kiln walls. Another soldier answered with a laugh. "Empty," he said. Footsteps moved on. The relief came too soon. A torch dropped just outside, flames licking at the entrance. The heat surged through the narrow space, smoke seeping in. The women coughed quietly, covering their mouths. Jinzō motioned for patience, but panic rippled through the group. The healer clutched her satchel tighter. Something small clinked inside, the sound of metal. Oritsu turned sharply. "What was that?" she hissed. The healer froze. "Nothing." Tomoe frowned. "Show us." The woman shook her head. "It's medicine." Oritsu reached forward, snatching the satchel before she could resist. Inside were herbs, cloth, and a small pouch of silver coins, marked with the same crest as the daimyo's seal. The room turned cold in a new way. "Where did you get this?" Tomoe demanded. The healer's lips trembled. I took them from the guards before we fled. You thought you'd buy your way out," Oritsu said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of certainty that cut. "I did it for all of us," the healer insisted. "If we survived, we'd need money." Oritsu's eyes flashed. "Or maybe you planned to trade the letter for your life." "No!" "I swear." The argument was cut short by a sharp thud outside. Another soldier's voice shouted, "Light the rest!" Jinzō moved quickly, snatching the satchel from Oritsu and tying it closed. "Yeah, enough," he whispered. "This won't matter if we're burned alive." He pressed his shoulder against the kiln wall and pushed. The snow outside cracked, giving way to light and cold air. "Move," he ordered. They spilled out into the open, just as flames reached the kiln beside them. Smoke poured into the sky, bright against the white field. Soldiers turned, shouting, torches waving. Jinzō pulled the healer up by her arm. "Run west!" They sprinted across the clearing. Arrows hissed through the air, embedding in the snow. One struck near Oritsu's feet. She didn't flinch, just kept running. When they reached the tree line, Jinzō turned back. The kilns burned in a line of fire behind them, smoke rising like black banners. In the glow, he saw the soldiers regrouping. He counted fast, too many to fight even for a younger man. He gritted his teeth. The healer stumbled beside him, clutching her side. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I didn't." "Save your breath," he said. They pushed deeper into the forest, moving until the fire was just a glow behind the trunks. When they finally stopped, the group collapsed. Tomo faced the healer. "You nearly killed us." The woman fell to her knees. "I wanted to survive." "So did the girl you buried," Oritsu said coldly. Jinzō looked between them. "Enough! She lives, and that's punishment enough." Tomo's voice softened but stayed sharp. "And what of you, Ronin? You still decide who lives and dies?" He met her gaze. "No, the mountain decides. I just listened faster than you." No one spoke after that. The forest groaned under the weight of snow. When the silence finally broke, it came not from voices, but from the faint echo of a horn. Distant, deliberate. Another signal. Another pursuit. Jinzō turned west again, his face unreadable. The world had grown small, just snow, breath, and footsteps. Behind him Oritsu whispered, "Every time we stop, someone betrays something." He answered without turning. "That's how truth works. It burns before it frees." The wind picked up, scattering ash through the trees. The scent of the kilns followed them long after the flames had died. By the third night, exhaustion had stripped them of words. The forest had changed. Trees thinned, snow deepened, and the silence grew heavier, pressing down like stone. They hadn't slept more than an hour each night. The ground they gained under moonlight melted with the first daylight snow. Jinzō walked at the front, his pace even, but his body had begun to slow. Every muscle carried weight from years that had finally caught up to him. They stopped beneath a cliff of frozen rock where icicles hung like spears. The women sank to the ground, too tired to speak. The healer sat apart, head bowed. No one looked at her. Oritsu leaned against a trunk, sharpening her knife with a piece of flint. The sound scraped through the quiet, rhythmic and hard. "You can't lead us forever," she said finally, not looking up. Jinzō didn't answer. He sat beside the frozen wall, unwrapping the cloth from his palms. The skin was raw, torn from climbing and frost. He poured snow into his hands, letting it melt against the wounds. The pain was sharp, clean. It made him feel awake. Oritsu glanced toward him. "You could have killed that patrol 2 nights ago." "You didn't. You could have left the healer behind." "You didn't. Are you still trying to earn something from the gods?" He closed his fists. "No. The gods stopped watching long before I stopped fighting." She studied him for a moment. "Then why help us?" "Because guilt doesn't end when you name it." Oritsu's knife paused mid-stroke. "My sister's name was Yai." Jinzō looked up, his eyes narrowing. "She trusted the samurai who guarded the granary," Oritsu said. "She said they were honorable. That one of them even helped the villagers once, years before. His name was Sakuma." He looked away. "That name's dead." "Not to me." Tomo, listening nearby, spoke softly. "Enough, Oritsu. This isn't the time." "There's never a time," Oritsu snapped. "We run, we freeze, we bury children, all because men like him stay silent when they should speak." Her words hit harder than the cold. The others avoided Jinzō's eyes, but every woman was listening. He stood, his shadow stretching long across the snow. "You think I don't know," he said. "I've lived 15 years in silence for one moment of hesitation. Every time I open my eyes, I see the same fire. It never ends." Oritsu rose, facing him. "Then end it by doing something right for once." Their breaths collided in the cold between them, the air trembling. Tomo stepped between them. "Enough. The soldiers are the enemy, not the past." Jinzō exhaled slowly, the anger leaving as quickly as it came. "The past is the enemy," he said. "It follows quieter, but it never stops." He turned toward the cliff, scanning its surface. The rock curved inward, a natural hollow, half sheltered from wind. "We stay here until morning," he said. Tomo hesitated. "If they find us, they won't. The storm will cover us." But storms didn't always mean protection. Sometimes they carried sound farther. That night the wind howled through the valley like a wounded animal. The temperature dropped fast. The women huddled together for warmth. Jinzō sat near the entrance, his back to them, eyes fixed on the white void beyond. The memory came again, not as vision, but as smell. Smoke, wet wood, burnt rice. He could almost hear Yai's scream, the one he hadn't answered. He gripped the hilt of the katana through the cloth, feeling the metal's cold pulse. It would be easy. Just one moment of release, one act of fire to erase the weight. But killing wouldn't change anything. It never had. He closed his eyes. The snow pressed harder against the entrance, sealing them in half-darkness. Behind him, the healer whispered a prayer for forgiveness. No one else joined. Morning came grey and weak. The storm had passed, but a new sound replaced it, the distant beat of hooves. Jinzō woke first. He moved to the entrance, pulling aside a layer of snow. Below the ridge, black figures moved in formation, banners stiff in the wind. Not patrol, a full detachment, maybe 30 men. At their front rode an officer with a scar across his jaw. Jinzō recognized him instantly, Takigawa Saburo. He had served under him once, the same man who had ordered the burning of Yai's village. The same man Jinzō had obeyed without question. The sight froze him more than the cold. His breath fogged the air in short, sharp bursts. He turned back to the women. "They've brought an army," he said. "The officer leading them. He's the one behind everything." Oritsu's expression didn't change, but her grip tightened on her knife until her knuckles went white. "Then we kill him." Jinzō shook his head. "You can't, he's trained. He'll cut you down before you take a step. Then you do it," she said. He didn't answer. Tomoe spoke next, quieter. "If they catch us, the letter dies with us. The proof dies. Your silence continues." The words hung between them, heavy and precise. Jinzō looked at the horizon again. The soldiers were spreading out, forming a line. They'd closed the valley by midday. He wrapped his palms again and stood. "Then we end it before they do." Oritsu stepped beside him. "You're going to fight?" "No," he said. "I'm going to draw them away. Fighting comes later." She stared at him, then nodded once. "If you fall, I'll finish it." He almost smiled. "That's what I'm afraid of." He stepped out into the light, snow crunching beneath his feet, the air filled with the low hum of war drums rolling up the valley. Behind him, the women packed what little remained. The healer tucked the letter under her robe again, whispering to herself that she would see it reach the capital. Oritsu watched Jinzō disappear down the slope, her knife trembling in her hand. She didn't know if he went to save them or to bury what was left of himself, and neither did he. The valley stretched below him, white still, endless. Jinzō stood at the ridge, watching the soldiers fan out across the frozen basin. 30 men, maybe more. Their armor flashed dull in the pale light, banners snapping like broken wings. At their head, Takigawa Saburo rode with the same poise he'd had 15 years ago, when orders were given to burn the innocent. The same scar across his jaw, the same arrogance. Jinzō crouched behind a pine, steadying his breath. The wind was with him. It carried their sound away. He reached into his sleeve and unwrapped a small cloth bundle. Inside lay flint, oil, and an old strip of parchment from his military days. He hadn't touched these tools since the war. But habits never died. They just waited for command. Below, Saburo dismounted, shouting orders. The soldiers spread to search the lower ridges, unaware the one man they sought stood above them. Jinzō studied the terrain. Narrow pass to the east, frozen stream to the west, a ravine cutting straight through. He could lead them there, make them believe he fled, draw them into the choke point. It was a plan meant for younger bones, but younger men lacked the patience that came with regret. He moved quietly through the trees, every step measured. The snow crunched once, softly, but even that sounded like a warning. He paused, listened. Only wind. By the time he reached the stream, his breath came in clouds. The ice glimmered thin in places. He crouched and poured oil along a line where cracks spread under the surface, marking a narrow path. The wind bit at his face. His fingers went numb. He worked anyway. When he finished, he stood still, looking at his reflection on the ice. Old, scarred, half man, half memory. "You wanted peace," he whispered to it. "Now earn it." He struck flint against steel once, twice. A faint spark caught on the parchment, then died. On the third try, flame held. He waited, patient as snowfall. In the distance, horns blared. The soldiers had found the trail he'd left on purpose. Footprints carved into soft drifts, leading straight toward the ravine. He heard Saburo shout, "He's alone! Bring him to me!" Jinzō placed the burning parchment at the edge of the oil. The flame licked along the slick trail, thin and bright as a vein of fire. He turned away, walking toward the ridge opposite, climbing fast. He remembered every man he'd killed before this day, faces blurred by smoke, orders spoken by cowards. This time he would fight for silence, not survival. Behind him, the flame reached the cracked ice. At first only a hiss, then a roar. The oil ignited the trapped air below, heat splitting the surface. A section of the frozen stream collapsed with a sound like thunder. The front line of soldiers fell through, screaming into freezing water. The others froze in confusion. Saburo cursed, pointing uphill. There, on the ridge! Jinzō kept climbing. His breath came hard now, every muscle screaming. Arrows whistled past. One struck the tree beside him, splintering bark. He didn't stop. At the crest, he turned, drawing the short bow he'd carried since the wars. One arrow left. That was all he'd need. Saburo advanced alone now, blade drawn, shouting his name like a curse. Sakuma Jinzō! The coward who fled judgment. Jinzō exhaled slowly, knocked the arrow and drew. His fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of 15 winters pressing through his arms. He released. The arrow struck the ground at Saburo's feet, not his chest. A deliberate miss. The point buried deep in the snow beside him, carrying a message tied to its shaft. A strip torn from the healer's satchel, the crest of the daimyo drawn in ash. Saburo frowned, snatching it up. He read the mark, eyes narrowing. His men gathered around, confused. Jinzō's voice echoed from the ridge. Tell your lord that his seal kills faster than steel. Tell him it burns villages better than fire. Saburo's snarl cut the air. Come down, old man! Jinzō unsheathed his katana, slow, deliberate. The sound carried like thunder through the snow. For 15 years it had slept. Now steel met air once more. He stepped onto the slope, feet firm despite the ice. You burned children to honor men unworthy of the word, he said. Now burn your pride. Saburo charged, screaming. They met halfway down, steel flashing silver. The first clash sent a shock through Jinzō's arms. The second split open Saburo's sleeve. He moved with precision, no wasted strength, no fury. Every motion drawn from discipline, not rage. Saburo struck harder, younger and faster, but anger made him blind. Jinzō sidestepped, letting the man's momentum carry him too far. A boot slipped on ice. Jinzō's blade rested at his throat. Finish it, Saburo spat. Jinzō held him there, breath steady, blade unmoving. Snow fell between them, slow, weightless. No, Jinzō said. That's your punishment. He pulled the blade away and turned. Behind him, Saburo cursed again, raising his sword to strike. Jinzō moved faster than his age allowed. One motion, but not to kill, but to disarm. The katana swept aside Saburo's wrist. The other man's sword fell into the snow. Jinzō pressed the tip of his blade into the ground. Your death would be mercy. You don't deserve it. Saburo stared up at him, hatred turning to something worse. Fear. Jinzō walked away, each step deliberate, the storm swallowing his figure. When he reached the ridge again, the mountain opened wide before him, white, infinite, indifferent. He looked back only once. Saburo was kneeling in the snow, surrounded by his men, shouting orders that no one obeyed. Jinzō sheathed his katana slowly, the sound soft, final. He had broken his vow, but not his soul, and somewhere in that balance between silence and action, he felt the first trace of peace he'd known in years. The wind shifted. The snow began again, soft, steady, covering everything he had done. Jinzō stood on the ridge, hands trembling as the weight of the fight drained from his body. Below, Saburo's men pulled their commander from the ice, their torches scattered and dying in the storm. The mountains swallowed their shouts until they were just another echo among ghosts. He started back up the slope toward the caves. Each step was heavy. The years pressed against him harder than the cold. His knees shook, his breath burned in his throat. Still he climbed, not to survive, to finish what had begun 15 winters ago. When he reached the hollow where the women hid, he found the entrance half buried in snow. He called once, no answer. He brushed the drift away with raw hands and ducked inside. They were there, alive, waiting in silence. Oritsu was the first to rise, eyes scanning his face for what words could not say. Is it done? She asked, "It's over," he said. His voice was rough, scraped clean of anything but truth. "The man who led them will not follow again." Tomo exhaled, a breath that sounded like disbelief. The healer clutched her satchel tighter, as if afraid the letter had lost its meaning now that blood wasn't spilled over it. "Then we go to the capital," Oritsu said. He shook his head. "No, you'll go. The mountain's clear enough to cross now. You follow the river until it bends east. It will take you to the main road," Tomo frowned. "And you?" "I stay." Oritsu stepped closer. "Why?" He looked toward the mouth of the cave, where the snowlight poured in pale and endless. "Someone has to hold their eyes here, so they don't look for you." Her jaw tightened. "You think that's redemption?" He met her stare. "It's silence with purpose. That's the closest thing to it." Oritsu's hands trembled. For the first time, anger left her voice. "You could come with us." "No." He drew a long breath. "Every man owes the world one honest act. This is mine." She held his gaze a moment longer, then looked down. "You sound like her," he said quietly. Oritsu's eyes lifted. "My sister?" She said almost the same thing before she died. For the first time since she'd known him, his voice cracked. Not with weakness, but weight. "She begged me to speak for her. I didn't. Now I do." He turned toward the healer. "Give me the letter." The woman hesitated, then reached into her robe and handed it to him. The paper was worn, the wax seal half melted, the crest still visible. He took it gently, as if it could bleed. He pressed it into Oritsu's hands. "You deliver it," he said. "You tell them her name. Tell them mine if you must. But make them see what was done." She closed her fingers around it. "And if they don't listen, then burn it," he said. "Let the truth turn to ash. At least it will die honestly." A long silence filled the cave. Only the faint drip of melting ice broke it. Tomo finally nodded. "We'll go when the light rises." Jinzō stepped outside first. The storm had thinned to a slow fall, flakes drifting sideways, vanishing before they touched the ground. He stood with his hands behind his back, breathing the cold air. His palms still stung from gripping the blade. The mountain stretched before him, white and empty, the same as the day he had sealed himself away. Behind him, the women packed what little they had. Oritsu came last, pausing beside him at the entrance. "If you live through this," she said, "come down the mountain. There's room for silence in the world, too, the kind that doesn't kill." He didn't answer. He only watched the horizon. The torches below had gone out. Smoke rose faintly where the ice had broken. He could still hear Saburo's voice, thin and far. Orders meant to sound powerful now only carried fear. The women left at dawn. Their figures grew small against the valley's white floor, 10 shadows moving toward the world beyond. The healer glanced back once, then lowered her head and kept walking. Jinzō stood until they disappeared into the fog. Then he turned toward the cave, where the brazier still glowed faintly from the night before. He knelt beside it and fed it a handful of dry twigs. The flame rose, weak at first, then steady. He placed his katana beside it, unsheathed clean, still bright from the clash. For a moment, the reflection of the flame ran along the blade like a pulse. He sat back on his heels. His breath slowed. The world outside the cave was quiet again. The kind of quiet he'd once mistaken for peace. Now he understood. Silence meant nothing if no one was left to break it. When the wind came through the valley again, it carried the faint sound of hooves retreating, soldiers leaving, justice delayed but not denied. The mountain, for the first time, felt lighter. Jinzō leaned forward and warmed his hands over the fire. The skin cracked where scars met heat, and a thin line of blood rose. He smiled faintly, the first in years. "Rest now," he murmured. Not to himself, but to every name he'd carried. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the path the women had taken, covering the past and finally covering him, a man who had chosen to stay, not out of guilt but out of grace. The storm died with the sunrise. The mountains stood silent again, a vast white plain stretching beyond sight. Nothing moved except the slow drift of snow sliding from the pines. Jinzō woke where he had sat, back straight, legs folded, the brazier's faint warmth brushing his hands. For the first time in years, he'd slept without dreams. The quiet felt different now, not the kind that smothered, but the kind that asked nothing. He stepped outside the cave. The air was clean, sharp. Down in the valley, no banners remained, no torches, no voices. The soldiers were gone. Only black scars on the snow marked where the fire had touched the ice. He stood there a long time, watching his breath rise. The ache in his arms was heavy but honest. It reminded him he was still flesh, not a ghost tied to memory. He turned back toward the cave and saw the katana leaning beside the brazier. The steel had dulled from the cold, faint traces of frost along its edge. He knelt before it and wiped it clean with the cloth that had once bound it shut. Then slowly he slid it back into its sheath. The sound was soft, final. He placed the sword beside the brazier and bowed once, low and deliberate. A gesture of release. From the ridge, the wind carried faint noises, the kind that could have been echoes or voices. He listened, eyes closed, and thought he heard laughter. Not loud, not close, just the thin echo of it rolling down from the higher slopes. For a moment, he imagined Oritsu among the others. Guiding them along the road, her knife gone. Her hands steady, he stayed kneeling until the sound faded. Inside the cave, he found the healer's empty satchel folded neatly against the wall. No coins, no letter, just cloth, worn clean, unneeded. He held it a moment, then set it beside the brazier. The flame flickered, catching on the edge, and soon the fabric burned, curling into itself until it was nothing but ash. He watched it closely. The ember's glow mirrored the one he'd seen countless nights, the same pulse that had survived in silence all those years. Now it was quieter, balanced. The snow outside grew brighter as the sun climbed. The reflection of the light filled the cave, turning the ice above his head into a ceiling of fire. He stood under it, eyes narrowed, remembering another ceiling, one made of smoke and collapsing beams, and realized this one didn't frighten him. He stepped outside again. The path the women had taken was gone, buried under the night's fall. He liked it that way. It meant their story had left the mountain behind. He walked a little farther down the slope, until the wind opened into a small clearing. There he stopped, looking west, toward the direction they had gone. The horizon shimmered faintly, almost like heat. He reached into his sleeve and pulled out the ribbon Oritsu had left behind, the same one her sister had worn years ago, red turned almost brown with age. He imagined her somewhere beyond the valley, no longer walking in anger, but in memory. The kind of peace that doesn't erase pain, only carries it quietly. She must have placed it there while he slept. He held it between his fingers. The fabric was frayed but still strong. He tied it around the hilt of the katana and let it hang loose. It fluttered once in the wind before settling. A soft voice broke the air. Not real, just memory shaped by wind. "Thank you." He didn't turn. He didn't answer. He only closed his eyes and bowed his head. The mountain, for the first time, felt alive, not as a tomb, but as a witness. He sat beneath the pine, the brazier beside him, the blade resting in snow, the ribbon moving gently with the wind. The cold crept up his arms again, but it no longer hurt. It simply reminded him that he was still here, still waiting for the kind of silence that no longer punished. He looked at the horizon once more and smiled faintly. "It's enough," he said. The wind carried his words away, scattering them through the valley. By midday, snow began to fall again, thin, slow, endless. It covered the footprints, the broken branches, the remnants of fire. It covered the ribbon until only a faint line of red showed beneath the white. And then even that disappeared. When the wind rose again, the mountain whispered back the name it had kept for 30 winters. The storm never truly ended. It just softened. By the 4th day, the mountain had reclaimed everything, the trails, the scars, even the sound of the wind. To anyone passing below, there was no sign of what had happened. Only snow, endless and pure. Somewhere far beyond those ridges, 10 women walked the long road east. They carried no banners, no proof of what they had endured, only the memory of one man who chose to stay behind so they could reach the world that had forgotten them. And perhaps That was enough. On the ridge where Sakuma Jinzō once stood, the brazier still burned. No one tended it, yet the flame refused to die. It fed on the last of the charcoal and wind, a quiet light in a place that had known too much silence. When travelers later spoke of the hermit's fire that never went out, some said it was a ghost's offering. Others said it was the mountain itself, remembering mercy. No one could agree, only that the flame never flickered when the wind passed through, because it wasn't just fire. It was what remained of a vow, broken not by violence, but by compassion. If you've ever stood at the edge of your own silence, wondering whether to speak or to hide, remember the Ronin who chose to open his door. Honor isn't what you keep. It's what you're willing to risk when no one is watching. If this story stayed with you, leave your mark below, your thoughts, your silence, or your memory of another time. Every comment helps honor those who once lived by the blade, and those who learned to sheath it for good.